You've tried to lose belly fat, but nothing seems to work. This may be why. It's not just what you eat. Your liver may be blocking your ability to burn fat. Hello, health champions. Here are 10 signs your liver may be blocking fat burning. Sign number 1 is stubborn belly fat. If your belly fat is really stubborn, if it's resisting all your attempts, that is a sign that your liver may be involved. Because the liver is your metabolic hub. And if you eat excess sugar or carbohydrates, then the liver is going to convert them into fat. And if your liver is overloaded, now it's going to export fat in the form of triglycerides rather than burning them. And the liver receives blood circulation from the gut, but it also puts the blood circulation back into the abdomen through the portal circulation first. And also, visceral fat is actually more sensitive to insulin than most other body cells or fat cells in the body. And therefore, you're going to store belly fat faster in the belly than other areas. And part of this picture, when you get more abdominal fat, now you're also going to increase your insulin resistance. And now that is another mechanism for blocking fat burning. And sign number 2 that your liver may be blocking fat burning is if you have fatigue or if you're tired after meals. So here's how that works. The liver normally buffers blood glucose between meals. So between meals, blood sugar drops, but the liver kicks in and balances that out. However, if the liver is overloaded or insulin resistance, now you're going to have bigger blood sugar spikes and blood sugar crashes, because when you're insulin resistant, the insulin tends to overshoot. Because it's not working as well, the body's just going to keep pumping out insulin, and then by the time it finally starts working, now it has a tendency to overshoot because there's too much out in the circulation. And now your blood sugar crashes and you get fatigue. One more thing that happens is that the blood shifts to the digestion. So you have your circulation for the whole body. After a meal, you're going to allocate more of that blood for digestion. And this, of course, happens equally to everybody, whether you're insulin resistant or insulin sensitive. It's just something that happens. But if you are insulin resistant, if you already have some of this compromise, then any changes are going to be more noticeable. And one more thing that happens is that you also use up some energy to convert sugar into fat. So the more insulin resistant you are, the more your blood sugar tends to rise and the more your cells are going to resist the glucose and the triglycerides. So now more of the glucose has to be turned into fat, and that's a process that uses up energy. And for an insulin-resistant person, that could become significant and noticeable, even if it's not the main mechanism. Sign number 3 is if you get sugar or carb cravings. So if you're insulin resistant, if your liver is full of fat, now you're going to be depending more on carbohydrate metabolism because you can't access the fat. But at the same time, you have more blood sugar instability. You have more spikes and crashes, and the brain wants stable energy. So when the blood sugar drops a little bit, when the insulin overshoots, like we talked about before, now the brain is missing a little bit of glucose and it wants quick fuel when it crashes. But we also said that the liver is not releasing steady blood glucose the way it's supposed to, and therefore the brain has no choice but to send out signals for cravings. And if you have cravings, it's very difficult not to give into those. So you have a snack, you eat multiple snacks, now you get frequent blood sugar spikes and therefore also frequent insulin spikes, and of course that leads to increased fat storage. And now you get caught in a vicious cycle of eating whatever you crave, of spiking blood sugar and insulin, of crashing, and then craving again, and it starts all over. Sign number 4 that your liver may be too congested to burn fat is that you have brain fog or poor focus. So the liver, of course, is what clears toxins and metabolic waste. It's the cleaning engine in the body. But if the liver is overloaded, now we're going to see an increase in the circulating waste in the bloodstream. And of course, that's the same blood that feeds the brain, and it's going to start affecting the brain. In addition to the waste, which could cause neuroinflammation, we also said that we have unstable blood glucose, which means inconsistent brain fuel, and the brain is extremely dependent on a steady supply. So we need to understand that the brain is extremely sensitive to both toxins and glucose swings. Sign number 5 is elevated triglycerides. And most people don't understand really what triglycerides or blood fat are all about. They know that it's not great for your heart, it's a heart disease risk and so forth. But what's really happening is that the liver is going to convert excess carb to fat. We've already mentioned that. However, the liver also burns fat at a certain rate. But if we feed it too much carbs and too much fat, now it's going to release the extra triglycerides into the bloodstream. And the purpose of that is to supply fuel for your cells. But if your cells are insulin resistant, they're also resistant to glucose and triglycerides. So if it stays in the blood, this means that the liver is exporting triglycerides instead of burning them, but it also means that your cells are not accepting them. And this is a very strong marker or indicator that your liver and your body is in fat storage mode, also known as insulin resistance, because it's the insulin that is causing fat storage and preventing fat burning. So we need to understand that the liver is at the center of most metabolic things going on in the body. So if it has to do with energy or hormones or metabolism, the liver has a hand in it. But it doesn't mean that you have a bad liver or a sick liver. It doesn't mean that you run a blood test and all your liver enzymes are through the roof. What it means is that your liver is overwhelmed. It's overworked and congested. And the reason it's overwhelmed, overworked is for several things. It's frequent meals, it's excess sugar and carbohydrate, it's seed oils, it's processed foods that are full of seed oils, and also alcohol and toxins, which the liver alone can do something about. And besides diet, we have to understand that a sedentary life, like not getting enough movement, because movement does lighten the load. It doesn't reverse all of insulin resistance for most people, but it lightens the load because it uses up some of the sugar that could get turned into fat. Also, poor sleep is very significant. Poor sleep increases insulin resistance and cortisol. And of course, stress, chronic stress, will increase cortisol, which will raise blood sugar, which will raise insulin and make you more insulin resistant and pack more fat into your liver and your abdominal cavity. So it's not a single thing, it's multiple things, and it's a constant load and not enough recovery for the liver. So if these are the causes, then obviously these are the things that we have to reverse. And for some people, it might be enough to handle one or two. For a lot of people, they need to do all of these for a period of time before anything starts happening. So frequent meals simply means you eat fewer meals to handle that in a shorter period of time. If you have excess sugar and carbs, obviously you have to cut that out and replace that with good quality fats and proteins. If you're eating processed foods and alcohol and you're exposed to toxins, then you got to learn and figure out what those toxins are and how to cut back on processed foods and alcohol. And if you're not moving enough, you got to start moving. If you're not sleeping enough, then you got to have to allocate the time to allow enough sleep. But also very often, you have to figure out what the stress is that keeps you from getting proper sleep. Sign number 6 that your liver may be blocking fat burning is if you have skin issues. And the reason here is that the liver is the primary detox organ, the primary detox pathway in the body. But if the liver is overwhelmed, now the body is going to look for other excretion paths, other ways of getting rid of this. And now the skin becomes a backup exit. So the buildup of toxins and inflammation could lead to acne and rashes, for example. And very often you will find that the reason the liver is backed up or insufficient is that it's overwhelmed with fat metabolism and it's suffering in terms of fat metabolism. Sign number 7 is that you maybe have a hard time to tolerate fat. And the liver makes something called bile. And this bile is there like a detergent to break up little droplets of fat and make them smaller so the enzymes can start working on them. But a sluggish liver is also going to make less bile. It's going to produce less bile. And if we don't have enough, we can't break up the fat properly. And some of the symptoms, some of the things you might notice would be fat poor digestion leading to bloating and nausea. And then what happens if you don't break down the fat? Now it's going to start passing straight through you, and you could end up with something called a fatty stool. And what that looks like is you could have floating stool. It could be pale and grayish. And the reason for that, of course, is if it's floating, it's not the only reason it could be floating, but it's one of them if there is a lot of fat in the stool because fat floats. But the reason it's pale is that you have less bile, and the bile contains a lot of pigments that give the stool its normal brown color. And number 8 is if you have weight gain despite eating healthy. So of course we have to understand what eating healthy is, and it's not necessarily the guidelines that we want to follow. Because if we have a frequent, low-fat, low-calorie meal, but we have them too often, then we can still have an overload of carbs. We could still eat so-called healthy carbohydrates because the main guidelines recommend that we get multiple servings of grain every day. And all these carbs, all the rice and the bread and the starches turn into sugar. They consist of sugar. So once we break them down, they become blood glucose and they spike insulin, and they have all of these deleterious effects on the liver that we talked about. And what happens if we start eating these frequent meals, or if we've always eaten frequent meals, is there is no gap between the meals. There's no fasting gap where we could allow insulin to drop. Because every time we eat, we're going to spike insulin to some degree. The more carbs that are in the meal, the more we're going to spike it. And if we put those meals back to back, then the insulin never has a chance to go down. We just keep pushing insulin spike after spike, and there's no room for fat burning. There's no window for fat burning to take place. And with all that insulin, the liver is in a constant state of fat storage, and it's never allowed to switch to fat burning mode. Sign number 9 that your liver might be involved with fat is hormone imbalances. And most people don't realize that the liver actually breaks down and clears hormones. You have to realize that hormones is about balance. So when the body releases, when a gland releases a hormone, it's supposed to have an action, but not forever. So the liver is who puts a stop to that and calibrates the input, the effect of that hormone. But if the liver is sluggish, it might break down less hormones, and now we have an increase in circulation of certain hormones. So over time, this can lead to hormone imbalances. And especially one hormone that's important to break down in a timely manner is estrogen. So if we have an increase in estrogen, that is a hormone that promotes fat storage, especially around the hips and on the belly. And depending on the type of hormone imbalance, we could also definitely get a decrease in overall metabolism and basal metabolic rate. And sign number 10 is if you plateau no matter what you try. And what happens is that if you have a chronic liver overload, if you're constantly pushing the liver beyond its capacity, it's going to adapt. And the main part of that adaptation is called insulin resistance. And of course, with a high level of insulin, we have increased fat storage. That's what insulin does. And at the same time, though, it's also going to block fat burning. And what a lot of people notice at this point is that diet and exercise stop working. But I want to illustrate this with 3 different examples. So people respond differently, and that's what we have to remember. So let's call this person number 1. He weighed 300 pounds and his A1C, his average blood glucose, was 8, and it's supposed to be around 5, 4.8 to 5.3. And if you're over 6.5, you're a diabetic. So this guy was a diabetic, basically. And his insulin was at 15, and the ideal level there is between 2 and 5. So he was insulin resistant. He had a significantly, but not extreme, elevation of insulin, and his A1C was in the diabetic range. Now, this person, he started exercise and he went on a low-carb diet. And as a result, after a few months, maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months, he was down to 180 pounds. And when he checked his blood glucose, his A1C, it was down into an ideal range of 5.3, and his insulin was in an ideal range of 4. So this would be an ideal person. This is an ideal scenario. And what is this person going to think? He's going to tell everyone, hey, look, here's what I did and it works. And if someone else tries and it doesn't work, he's going to think that they didn't do it right. And unfortunately, that's just how we are as humans. Whatever works for us, we think that's going to work for everybody. But like I said, this is like an ideal scenario with a person who is genetically lucky. He's moderately insulin resistant. He had just had a lot of bad habits, and once he reversed them, his body sorted it all out. And if you have some stubborn belly fat, some stubborn weight, then you're going to look at that one and you're going to get very frustrated because you don't know why it's working for him and not for you. But like I said, there are differences between us. There's genetic differences. There's differences in our lifestyle and our experiences in the past. And then let's look at another example. So this would be person number 2, and he falls somewhere in between ideal and extremely stubborn. So this would be moderately stubborn. He started out at 300 pounds, A1C of 8. So far they're the same. His insulin is a little higher, which could indicate that either it's just an individual variability or he's actually a little bit more insulin resistant. But this person, he tried everything, because when he just did the low carb and a little bit of exercise, nothing happened. So he had to add on everything he could think of. And he did the intermittent fasting, he did the aerobic exercise, the proper exercise, made sure he relaxed and meditated and slept well, and so forth. So it didn't happen as fast, but eventually he also came down to 180 pounds. But instead of taking a few months, it might have taken a year or 2. But eventually he got the numbers down where they needed to be, an A1C of 5.3 and an insulin of 4. And that brings us to our stubborn example. This is someone that a lot of people can identify with. You tried everything and you wonder, why is it working for these people and not for me? And there are genetic reasons, there are individual reasons. We have different experiences in the past. We store stress and experiences differently. But this person started at 300. They had an A1C of 8 and their insulin was even a little bit higher. Now, they did everything also, just like this guy. Everything they could think of, they thought that they did it right. And here's the interesting thing, that they looked at their blood work and their A1C came down to 5.3. So this person is still going to benefit tremendously from improving their lifestyle. Almost everything on their blood work is going to look a whole lot better. But for this person, in this example, they did not lose any weight at all. They did not burn any belly fat. They stayed at 300 pounds. And for most people, that would be a mystery, but this person checked their insulin and it was still at 25. So this is an example of a very, very stubborn metabolism, very stubborn insulin resistant. And it's going to be much, much harder for that person, but you don't want to despair completely. You just have to understand you're not going to get the results of these other people. And it starts with blood work. You have to confirm sort of what's going on here. If you've done everything right, you brought down your blood sugar, but your insulin is sky high, now it's a different situation. And you also have to ask yourself, what does everything really mean? Because a lot of people, they'll cut back on their sugar and their carbs, they'll go low carb, high fat, and they consider themselves keto, which not everyone needs to be keto, but if your metabolism is that stubborn, I would suggest that you cycle in and out of keto quite a bit. And you don't know if you're on a ketogenic diet if you don't measure and make sure there are ketones in your bloodstream. Because whatever carbs you're eating would still be too many for you if you don't have ketones. Whatever frequency of meals would still be too many if you're not making ketones. So the next step would be intermittent fasting, meaning eating fewer meals in a shorter time span. You could start, a lot of people do well with 16-8 or 18-6, meaning you eat all your meals in 8 hours and you fast for 16, or you eat all your meals in 6 hours and you fast for 18 hours, or you simply eat one meal a day. And if that doesn't do it, then you could go to one meal every other day. Now, you don't want to jump straight into that, and you want to start gradually, but once you hit that one meal every other day, you don't want to do it all the time. You cycle back and forth. You shake it up a little bit to force your body to adapt. And then you want to do a lot of exercise. More is better as long as it's strictly aerobic, meaning that your heart rate and your intensity is middle, so to speak. You're not huffing and puffing. You're not pushing your body into extremely high heart rates. You can mostly engage in walking. That's what the aerobic is going to be for most people. And as much as you can tolerate it, as long as it's aerobic, you are burning fat in that state. When you get your heart rate up, when you start huffing and puffing, you are pushing your body to make cortisol and you're not burning as much fat anymore. And it backfires because with the cortisol, you're using up carbs that are going to give you cravings later. And then you want to do a minimal amount of high intensity interval training. So just seconds at a time, just get your heart rate up to max and you're done, and don't do it more than a couple of times a week. I've done several videos on this. So if you want to understand exactly how to exercise, then look up some of those. But you also want to manage and control stress. So if you allocate enough time for sleep, for starters, but you're still not getting the quality, now you might want to look into meditation to help your body reach deeper levels of relaxation. And you might also look for some tools to help you breathe and relax and control your brain waves, etc., to make sure that you're not just going through the motions, but you're actually getting there. And when you've done all that, the next probably most important piece, even before some of these, for some people that's going to be the deal breaker, is the biome. Because the health of our bacteria, the variety and complexity and the amount of bacteria that we have in our biome determines so much of our metabolic signaling and our immune function and our stress and inflammation levels. In fact, if we look at diet and stress and liver and the biome, there is a relationship. All of these are interrelated. They affect each other. And all of these arrows are bidirectional, meaning that the effect, the influence goes both directions. And if you suspect that your biome may be involved, which a lot of people probably should do, then it's a good idea to get it tested and sit down and talk with someone who has some experience and knows how to address any imbalances and how to rebuild it and rebalance it. So it's not about calories. It really isn't. And it's also not about willpower, except that you have to have enough willpower, maybe watch enough videos and learn enough about the mechanisms that you get the willpower to start learning, and then you can start changing. And don't expect it to change overnight. For some people, it's easy. For others, it's not. But if you hang in there, you're going to make it. And once you start learning and understanding enough and you decide to change, now you have the tools to start taking control back, one piece at a time. Again, it doesn't happen overnight, but as long as you're willing to make small, consistent improvements, then things will move forward. And the things you take control over is you control your hunger and cravings by stop eating the processed foods. You have to have the willpower to learn what those processed foods and the sugar do, and the willpower and take the time to start cooking real food. And now that's how you control your hunger and cravings. And then you start limiting the time window and you realize that your body doesn't need food all the time. And what you're also going to notice if you stick with it and you're consistent is that it gets easier and easier because one thing builds on another. Your metabolism improves, your brain starts working better, you get cleaner, more stable fuel. And now you find that it's easier to control your mood, it's easier to control your focus, and it's easier to stay consistent and do the right things. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.